My Weird School Fast Facts. Explorers, Presidents, and Toilets. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pelot. Chapter 11. Weird Fast Facts About the Presidents. Arlo, let's take turns sharing weird facts about the presidents. Okay, I go first. By the time he became president, George Washington had only one real tooth left in his mouth. His false teeth were made from hippopotamus, walrus, and elephant ivory, and cow, elk, and human teeth. In 1807, the explorer Zebulon Pike sent Thomas Jefferson 2 grizzly bear cubs. They lived in a cage on the White House lawn. At James Madison's second inaugural ball, his wife Dolly served a special treat: ice cream. Most people had never tasted it before. The First Lady's favorite flavor was oyster. Yuck, gross. Madison was the smallest president, by the way. He was only about 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed less than 100 pounds. What a shrimp. During the Revolutionary War, James Monroe was wounded at the Battle of Trenton. He carried a bullet in his shoulder for the rest of his life. He died on the 4th of July, just like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, but 5 years later. John Quincy Adams used to go swimming in the Potomac River, naked. One time, someone stole his clothes while Adams was swimming. He had to ask a boy to go to the White House and get him something to wear. For his inauguration party, 20,000 citizens stormed the White House to greet Andrew Jackson. Things got out of control, so he sneaked out a window and went to a hotel. The people wouldn't leave the White House, so tubs of punch were put out on the front lawn. When the partygoers went outside to drink, the White House staff locked the doors and windows so the people couldn't come back. According to legend, the word okay was invented when Martin Van Buren was running for re-election in 1840. He was from Old Kinderhook, New York, and his nickname was Old Kinderhook. While he was campaigning for president, people shortened it to OK. William Henry Harrison's inaugural address was 8,445 words long. That's longer than my Weird School book. It took Harrison about 2 hours to read it, and he did it on a cold, wet day with no coat or hat. And do you know what happened a month later? Harrison died of pneumonia, so he had the longest speech and the shortest term of any president. Zachary Taylor was the second president to die in office. He celebrated the 4th of July in 1850 at the Washington Monument. It was a hot day, and Taylor cooled off with buttermilk and cherries that were probably contaminated with bacteria. He got sick and died 5 days later. John Tyler had more children than any other president, 15. His last child was born when he was 70 years old. Abraham Lincoln used to store his mail, his bank book, and important papers in his stovepipe hat. I guess they didn't have briefcases in those days. Ulysses S. Grant was once pulled over for speeding in Washington, D.C., and he didn't even have a car. The police officer took away Grant's horse and carriage, and the president had to walk the rest of the way home to the White House. He paid a $20 speeding ticket. Rutherford B. Hayes was the first president to have a telephone in the White House. Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, installed it himself. Do you want to know what the president's phone number was? It was 1. James A. Garfield didn't think people should get appointed to important posts in the government just because they knew the president. One man was angry when Garfield refused to give him a job, so he shot the president. Garfield died 11 weeks later, but it wasn't the bullet that killed him. The operations to remove the bullet with dirty instruments led to blood poisoning that really killed the president. Chester A. Arthur was nicknamed Elegant Arthur in the press because he liked nice clothes. Arthur owned 80 pairs of pants. That's a lot of pants. By the way, do you know why golfers always carry 2 pairs of pants? They might get a hole in one. That's a joke. Benjamin Harrison was so formal that the White House staff secretly called him the human iceberg. He was also the first president to have electricity in the White House. First Lady Caroline Lavinia Harrison was afraid to touch the light switches, so she never turned them on. William McKinley was the first president to ride in this new invention called the automobile. But it wasn't much fun for McKinley. He got the ride in an ambulance after he was shot and rushed to the hospital. Teddy Roosevelt went on a bear hunt in 1902, but there was one problem. There were no bears. His guide finally found an old bear and tied it to a tree so Roosevelt could shoot it. But the president refused. A store owner in Brooklyn, New York, heard the story and asked his wife to create a stuffed bear. He put it in his store window with a sign that read, "Teddy's Bear." And that's how the teddy bear was born. William Taft was the largest president ever. He weighed 332 pounds. He was so big, a custom-made tub was built just for Taft. It was big enough for 4 regular-sized men. That is, if 4 regular-sized men took a bath together. When the United States entered World War I, President Woodrow Wilson brought a flock of sheep to the White House. The sheep mowed the lawn, which saved gas and labor. Their wool was auctioned to earn money for the Red Cross and for war hospitals. Warren G. Harding had the biggest feet of any president, size 14. Calvin Coolidge didn't talk much, and he was nicknamed Silent Cal. One time, a dinner guest told him she made a bet that she could get him to say more than 3 words. The president replied, "You lose." Franklin D. Roosevelt was afraid of the number 13. If there were 13 people at dinner, FDR would invite his secretary to join the group to make it an even 14. He would never leave for a trip on the 13th of the month. People who are afraid of the number 13 have what is called triskaidekaphobia. Alaska and Hawaii joined the United States during the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was also called Ike. At the end of his time in office, people chanted, "Ike is nifty, Ike is nifty." Started out with 48, ended up with 50. There are some curious coincidences between Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. They were elected exactly 100 years apart. Lincoln in 1860 and Kennedy in 1960. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy. Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. Both men were assassinated, and both of their vice presidents, named Johnson, became president. Do you know why Lyndon B. Johnson and his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, named their daughters Linda Bird and Lucy Baines? They did it so that all 4 members of the family would have the initials LBJ. Richard Nixon liked bowling so much that he had a bowling alley installed in the White House. Gerald R. Ford helped pay for law school by working as a fashion model. He was once on the cover of Cosmopolitan magazine. Jimmy Carter grew up on a peanut farm in Georgia and sold boiled peanuts from a wagon by the side of the road. He was the first American president to be born in a hospital. Before Carter, all the other presidents were born at home. Before becoming president, Ronald Reagan was a popular movie actor. One of his most famous films was the 1951 comedy Bedtime for Bonzo. Reagan played a college professor who has to raise a chimpanzee as if it was a human baby. Here's a trivia question for you. Who was the only president in history to throw up on a foreign dignitary? It was George H.W. Bush. In 1992, he was at a banquet at the home of the Prime Minister of Japan. Suddenly, Bush turned around and vomited in the Prime Minister's lap. That was weird. Afterward, the Japanese used the term bushu suru for throwing up. It means to do the Bush thing. Bill Clinton is one of the few presidents who won a Grammy Award. In fact, he won 2 of them. In 2004, he won for his narration of Peter and the Wolf. The next year, he won for the reading of his own book, My Life. As a teenager in Hawaii, Barack Obama worked at a Baskin-Robbins ice cream parlor. He says he hasn't truly enjoyed ice cream since. He also collects Spider-Man and Conan the Barbarian comics.